Hi, gorgeous girl. You went up. Hello. Oh, careful. What are you thinking? You gonna film a video for me? Did you read the book? What did you think? Yeah, did you like it? I did read you some bits actually. When you were scared of the thunder, I read to you. Yeah? You're a good girl. Reading Christian Bok's Eunoia is an absolute experience that I thoroughly recommend to every lover of the English language, and even to some people who don't currently love it, because I think it will open your eyes and let you see things in a new way. The book is a short experimental anthology that you really need to experience to kind of understand. Eunoia itself is the shortest word in the English language that contains all 5 vowels, and it literally means, like its definition, beautiful thinking, which I think makes it the perfect title for this book. So the majority of this book is made up of 5 chapters, 5, I guess you could call them kind of short stories, because there is a narrative there, each written using only 1 vowel, which is absolutely fascinating. When I first heard of this, I was like, I need to read it. Literally, like the day after I was told about it, I went out and bought a copy for myself, and 0 regrets. I've already given my copy on to another friend and been like, read this, you'll love it. So there's a chapter for A, a chapter for E, I, O, U, and so on. Writing something like this would be a real challenge anyway on its own, but Christian, bless him, gave himself extra challenges. He put extra rules in place for himself, which, well, I'll allow him to explain for himself, as he does in the little, I guess you could kind of call it like an epilogue of this book. All chapters must allude to the art of writing. All chapters must describe a culinary banquet, a prurient debauch. I really struggle to say the word prurient. That's a hard one. A pastoral tableau and a nautical voyage. All sentences must use accent, internal rhyme through the use of syntactical parallelism. All text must exhaust the lexicon for each vowel, citing at least 98% of the available repertoire. Although he does note that a few words go unused despite efforts to include them, for example, parallax, belvedere, gingivitis, monochord, and tumulus. The text must minimise repetition of substantive vocabulary so that ideally no words appear more than once. Obviously this is impossible, but he does give it a damn good go. And the letter Y is suppressed. So he gave himself all these rules and somehow still managed to write 5 cohesive narratives. It is genius. The second section of the book contains some shorter little pieces of writing which play with some interesting rules, and well, some other interesting rules and some different little experimental bits. But for today's video, I want to focus mostly on the first part of the book and talk about it, basically. Before we jump into that though, for those of you who don't know, hi, my name's Rachel. I make videos about books and poetry and also kind of social issues and things that interest me and get me emotional and talking about stuff and things. And as you may have seen in the beginning of this video, I have an adorably beautiful dog called Kyra who constantly pops up because she's my best friend. So if you're new here, it would be great if you subscribe. If you're not new here, then hi, welcome back. And don't forget to like the video, give me a comment for engagement, really helps with getting these kinds of videos out there and having more people talk about them. I feel like because this is quite an obscure topic, it probably won't have the same reach, so any and all engagement is really, really good and really helpful. So thank you in advance. So the text as a whole and each chapter individually is what is known as a lipogram, which very, very simply is a type of constrained writing in which one, or in this case multiple, letters are intentionally left out. The most famous example is probably Ernest Finson Wright's 50,000 word novel called Gadsby, not to be confused with The Great Gatsby. This is just simply Gadsby with a D, which completely excludes the letter E. Or more recently, the novel Elaminau P by Mark Dunn, which uses fewer and fewer characters as the book progresses. And this is kind of like constrained writing, kind of linked in with the plot, and it's very clever, and it's, yes. Words is hard. Oh my god. Oh my god, I thoroughly realise the irony of me stumbling over my words in a video like this, but what can you do? I'm merely human. So, I will admit, when I first opened Eunoia, it looked bizarre. I was like, what the hell is this? I didn't know what I was expecting, but I wasn't quite expecting this. It's prose, but it doesn't look like prose. it literally looks like an oddly formatted page in a dictionary. It just looks like it's listing like a bunch of words. It doesn't look like real sentences to the naked eye. It doesn't compute in your mind. And when I first started reading, I actually felt completely overwhelmed. I thought it was kind of difficult to read and I wasn't really getting into it. But then I decided to read it out loud. And this is something that I always tell people with poetry when they're like, I can't really get into it, I don't understand it, or like, what's this about? I'm like, read it out loud. You'll start to understand and hear it better and it will feel more natural. You'll understand how the words kind of naturally flow together and where the natural rhythms and stresses are. And that was what I did with this book, and that's when the magic kind of hit me. And the further I got into the book and the more I read and the more I read out loud, the more I kind of like was in awe. This book is literally like the pure expression of the impact of assonance in literature. It will absolutely make you consider the sound of your own writing or whatever you're currently reading so much more, especially if what you're writing or reading is poetry. It will make you a lot more conscious of the sounds of words and how all these silly little individual noises and sounds that we make, somehow we put them all together and it creates language and meaning and understanding, and it emotes stuff. And I just think there's something very magical about that. Right now, I'm just making lots of individual little noises, but somehow choosing to put them together in this order is conveying a meaning to you. I'm telling a story, I'm sharing an experience. And while that's something that's kind of always there in the back of my mind and something I'm thinking about because I'm interested in it, this book kind of brought it to the forefront of my mind again and made me really, really consider these things. And in particular, how vowel sounds have such an impact in how we express ourselves and how we understand other people. That said, while it makes you think of all that stuff, you have to remember that these are essentially short stories. And the narrative in each section is coherent and they are somewhat compelling and you do get quite invested in them. That said, I wouldn't suggest you read this book just for the story, but the fact that there is a narrative there at all and that he's done it so well is something important to consider and honestly something to applaud. It's great, it's very well done. So I've spoken in a number of other videos about the importance of assonance, especially in poetry. I can't remember specifically which ones I brought it up in now, but I do know, or I think I know, that I covered it in my big long intro to poetry video, which you can go and check out in full down in the video description right now if you fancy. Assonance at its core is very basically the repetition of the same vowel sound in writing, usually poetry, but we see it in all forms of writing. Some people refer to it more simply as vowel rhyme, so maybe your teachers have said something like that to you, or maybe you've heard it from someone else. It's the same thing, don't worry about it. And assonance or vowel rhyme plays a really important role in dictating how a poem or piece of writing flows and its overall tone and what it is telling the reader or listener. And what I really loved about Eunoia is that we get these long extended sections filmed with repetition of one particular vowel sound, and it really highlights the fact that each vowel creates a very different tone to the others. It gives the overall text a very different feeling. So even when they're describing very similar scenes, for example, they all have this pastoral tableau, they all have a nautical voyage, it doesn't matter. They each have very different tones, and while that could come down slightly to the word choice, I think most of it is in the tone created by this overwhelming assonance. And I mean, you have to remember that even within the vowel sections, there are different sounds that these vowels can make. So repetitions of ah creates a very different tone to repetitions of a, or e, or oh. And now I'm just sounding a bit like a monkey, aren't I? But do you know what I mean? So I was trying to describe how each kind of chapter or each vowel sounds myself, but then I found this little description online, which is quite a nice summary. So one person suggested that Bok creates a unique personality for each vowel. A is courtly, E is elegaic, another word I struggle to pronounce, I'm sorry. I is lyrical, O is jocular, and U is obscene, which isn't exactly how I would have described them, but not far off, and you know, I'm very open to other people's interpretations, so yeah, I think that makes sense. For me, I don't know if I would have maybe said A is courtly. Actually, no, that one is quite accurate, I think. The A sounds in this are definitely quite pompous. They're regal, they're authoritative, you know? Whereas the I's are more kind of whimsical and cheeky and kind of jaunty at times. The O's even more so. The O's get really cheeky, you know? One more thing that I do want to note before we jump into reading some actual sections of this book and going through some examples is that when I was reading each section, I found that it sounded almost like alien at first. It didn't quite feel natural, which is understandable, you know? You're not used to this much assonance at all, and it doesn't feel natural in speech when you're reading hundreds of words at a time with basically the same 2 or 3 vowel sounds. This kind of changed, however, when I got to the O chapter. And I thought at first this is just because, oh, well, you know, 4th chapter in, I'm getting used to this now. But then I got to the U's and I was like thrown off again. I'm like, so what is it about the O chapter that's special? And then I started to read it. And it hit me that it wasn't just that I was getting used to it at all. It was that the main difference is in the O chapter, it's the only one where some of the vowel sounds regularly sound like a different vowel. Now, I don't know if I'm explaining this right. So in the A chapter, right, you have that like ah sound like in hat and bat, and you have the R sound like in dark and art and heart. But they all sound like A sounds. They're all ah and R and so on. They're all sounds that only really come from an A. Whereas in the O chapter, it can sound like an O, like in lock or dog, but it can also sound like an O, like in sold or note or hold or whatever. But it can also sound like certain U sounds, so it can sound like like in cook or book. And that sounds the same way that U sounds in words like put or stuck. I mean, there's a reason that book and stuck rhyme. It's the same sound, but the difference is you're getting it from an O instead of a U. I don't know if I'm explaining this right at all, but like we all know that vowels have different sounds, right? And we know that these sounds can change by putting them together with other vowels or consonants or whatever. The thing is, when you're restricted to using just one vowel in a text, you're restricting the sounds you can use and create until you get to the O's, when it does feel a little less restrictive, because you're getting the sounds you would normally get from the O's and the U's and actually some of the E's as well, all in one, all created by this one single vowel. So I think to summarize what I'm trying to say is you get a wider variety of letter sounds from the O's than you do from any other vowel, and that made the text flow more naturally, and I was very aware of it even though it wasn't on a conscious level at first. I just found that very interesting. I hope that makes sense. I don't know. Because I mean, like, this happens a little with the other letters, but not as much and not to the same extent as it does in the O chapter. So overall, it just felt a lot more natural to me, and it really got me thinking about the different sounds we use in speech and how this all ties back to word choice in poetry and why that matters so much. And it is something that I talk about a lot in a lot of poetry videos. In good poetry, and I've said this time and time and time and time again, in good poetry, every word is chosen with purpose. And a lot goes into choosing those words, because it's not just the definition of the word that matters, but it matters how that word sounds, how it flows, what noises are you making to create that word, if that makes sense. I know that sounds really simplistic, but it's important. Where are the stresses? How many syllables is it? What does it rhyme with? What does it flow with? How does saying that word make you feel? How does saying that, or what tone or emotion or whatever, does saying that word or hearing that word make you think or feel? There are lots of words that all have very similar meanings. I mean, just open a thesaurus. But like, what are you? Are you angry, or are you miffed, or are you furious? And you also want to think as well about how that word sounds alongside other words in the poem or the piece of writing or whatever. So again, this is where assonance comes in, but also just kind of other bits of alliteration and rhyme and consonance and so on. So remember way back now when we spoke about one of my favourite Simon Armitage poems, Those Bastards in Their Mansions. I want you to listen to the opening lines of this, because he really uses a lot of assonance in this to get his point across and but not even his point, to get his feelings across, you know, it's very emotive. Those bastards in their mansions. To hear them shriek, you'd think I'd poisoned the dogs and vaulted the ditches, crossed the lawns in stocking feet and threadbare breeches. And that's just the opening lines. If we're just going purely on definition of words, you could very easily have said, those bad guys in their big houses, if you heard them shout, you'd think I'd hurt their pets and snuck inside their grounds, trespassing in old, damaged clothes. And it just doesn't have the same impact, does it? Because it doesn't have the rhythm, it doesn't have the punchiness, it doesn't have the stresses in the right places, and most importantly, it doesn't have the sounds in the right places. There's no flow to it. In Armitage's obviously superior version there, he uses a lot of assonance to show his anger and his disgust. You know, the way you have to spit out those verbs with the harsh vowel sounds. Bastards, mansions, shriek, ditches, breeches. It's very intentional. It absolutely sets the tone for the poem. You're spitting out these words in disgust. Compare that to another political but a lot less angry poem, and one which many of you have asked me to talk about, which is why I'm throwing this little side into this video, Amanda Gorman's The Hill We Climb. Again, political, but not quite as fueled by disgust, you know? Listen to her opening lines. She makes use of assonance here, but for a different purpose. So her repeated vowel sounds are different, not only in how they sound, but in why they're used. When day comes, we ask ourselves where we can find light in this never-ending shade. The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace. So again, you have... I'm sorry, Kara's snoring in the other room really loudly. But again, we have repeated vowel sounds. Day, shade, wade, beast, peace. But it's a lot slower. It's calmer. It's still as passionate, but the flow is more subtle. It's this calm, considered response, one of hope. While Armitage's is emotionally fueled in the moment, the narrator is currently angry and he wants to let you know. Gorman is reflective, Armitage is reactionary, and you hear that in both their tones, and the biggest way that I think they portray this is through their use of assonance. Bastards, mansions, breeches, stitches, compared to day, shade, beast, peace. And I mean, Gorman's is still punchy and powerful, but in a different way. It's a different tone overall. Anyway, the point is, assonance and just generally the use of vowel sounds in poetry and writing really set a tone for the piece, and I just want you to keep that in mind as we go forward and read some extracts from Eunoia and kind of listen to how the words flow and sound and the tone that the assonance sets. I figured the best way to make the points that I want to is to read you a few lines from different chapters describing similar events, and then let you guys have like a listen for yourself and judge what you think the differences are. I could sit here and tell you this is what I think and this is what I think, and don't worry, I will tell you that. But mostly I want to hear your interpretations and what you think it sounds like, and what tone you hear, what emotions you feel, what this makes you think of, and why you think certain word choice was important in certain places and so on. I want to hear your thoughts, because as always, analysis of writing and poetry and literature and everything is subjective, and while I can sit here and talk about the technical things, and you know, the technical stuff can be right and wrong. Either this is assonance or it's not, you know, that's a technical thing, but whether you like it or not, and what this means to you and what it tells you, that is subjective, and that is your choice, and it's up to you to decide what it means and how you react to it. And that's a very, very important thing to remember in all my poetry videos whenever you watch them. Yes, I'm sharing my opinion, but that doesn't make anyone else's opinion more or less valid than mine. Okay, so I want to begin by looking at a few of the banquet scenes. So the U chapter is definitely the most basic, and I find that this chapter almost sounds primitive, which kind of makes sense when you think about it, because some of the most rudimentary sounds that we make in response to emotional stimuli use these U sounds like ugh and ooh and then stuff like... I'm just gonna sit here and grunt at you now. But do you know what I mean? You know when you're upset or disgusted by something, you might go ugh. It's a very natural kind of base response that we as humans have, and I think this is very clear in the piece, and it's also reflected in the sentence structure that Bok has chosen to use in this section. So he's taken the primitive, bass, very id-driven sounds of this and I feel like I've forgotten how to speak. But you know, he takes these sounds and he's like, well, this sounds primitive. Let's also make the sentence structure short and snappy and simple and very, very basic. There's few compound sentences in this chapter. There's few complex sentences, but there's a lot of repetition. Kind of reminds me of reading like a children's, you know, Peter and Jane book where they're like, Peter did this, Jane did this. This is Pat the dog. Jane pats Pat the dog. Yeah, that sort of stuff. That's what I grew up with. A lot of repetition in that sense. So our character Ubu does something, and then he does something else, and then he does something else. We get simple declarative statements. We get lists rather than complex. Sorry, S's. We get lists rather than complex descriptions. So remember earlier when the online description thing described you as obscene? I'm not sure I'd say obscene, but I do think it's simple, it's primal, it's id-driven, and it's raw. Ubu gulps up brunch. Duck, hummus, nuts, fugu, bulgar, buns, crusts plus crumbs. Blutwurst, brewwurst, spuds, curds, plums. Munch, munch. Ubu sups. Ubu slurps rum punch. Ubu chugs full cups plus mugs. Full tubs plus tons. Glug glug. Ubu gluts up grub. Thus, Ubu's plump gut hurts. Ubu grunts. Ugh, ugh. Ubu burps up mucus sputum. Ubu upchucks lunch. Ubu slumps. Ubu sulks. Ubu shrugs. Ubu slurs drunk chum. So it's very, very simple, very this, then this, then this, then this. There's a little bit of like, I wouldn't even call it complexity. There's a semicolon in there, there's one. And that's about it. Everything else is very simple and basic and almost kind of caveman-like, you know, very primitive. Compare this to the feast in the I chapter, and while we still see plenty of lists because Bok wanted to get his vocab in there, you know, to reach that little target, you'll also see it's a lot more lyrical, it's a lot more complex, it flows a lot more like a regular piece of prose, it's not quite so stunted and snappy. With firm will I finish climbing, hiking till I find this inviting inn in which I might sit, dining. I thirst. I bid girls bring stiff drinks, gin fizz which I might sip while finishing this rich dish, nibbling its tidbits, ribs with wings and chili, figs with kiwis and icing. I swig citric drinks with vim, tippling kirsch, imbibing it till, giggling, I flirt with girlish virgins in miniskirts. Wink wink. This little extract here still has the whole feasting thing, but it takes us on this journey. It's more descriptive, it's more desire-driven than need-driven. You know, when Ubu supped and slurped and chugged, our narrator in this, he thirsts. He bids girls bring him drinks, and only then does he sip and swig while nibbling and giggling. We get to know more about this guy's wants and desires and his motivations, why he's doing these things, how he's doing them, what impact it has on others, rather than just this happens, this happens, this happens. This is a man telling a story, painting a picture, setting a scene, not just a basic retelling of events. And that's the difference between the I's and the U's. Of course, this is also decided by, you know, both the vocab available and the sound of words. It's not just one or the other. But I think it's a deliberate choice on Bok's part to utilize these short, sharp declaratives in the U chapter, while, on the other hand, using the complex, flowery descriptions in the others. I do think that was a very deliberate choice that works very well. Let's look at another example. So I want to talk about how the act of writing itself is discussed in the chapters A and O. So these are two of the longer chapters in the book, thanks to just there simply being more vocab available, which also means that Bok can get a little more creative in his descriptions, a little more complex in his sentence structure, and yet he still manages to create very different tones between the two chapters, despite having a lot of the similar tools at hand and despite choosing to use a lot of the, I guess, similar sentence structures. O feels a lot more whimsical and fun and less serious. Meanwhile, A feels quite authoritative. Someone might be a bit disappointed in you, and they're kind of judging you, they're speaking down to you a bit, they're barking these orders at you, they're telling you what to do. There's a lot of statements being stated, a lot of orders being barked. This is fact. The rhymes and assonance are used to hammer home a point, make sure it hits with impact. Whereas O just kind of flutters along and flows, and the rhymes make you smile and give you a little bit of a giggle. You know, the choice of words feels more light-hearted. It's merely descriptive, with a tone of kind of like wonder rather than being critical and analytical. So listen to these two little segments and tell me what you think, basically. Awkward grammar appalls a craftsman. A Dada bard as daft as a Zara damns stagnant art and scrawls in alpha, a slapdash arc and a backward sag, that mars all stanzas and jams all ballads. What a scandal. A law as harsh as a fatwa bans all paragraphs that lack an A as a standard hallmark. Compare that with loops on bold fonts now form lots of words for books. Books form cocoons of comfort, tombs to hold bookworms. Profs from Oxford show frosh who do postdocs how to gloss works of Wordsworth. Dons go cross town to look for bookshops known to stock lots of top-notch goods, cookbooks, workbooks. Room on room of how-to books for jocks, how to jog, how to box, books on pro sports, golf or polo. So listen to how the first one, despite, that was only 3 sentences in that first one. They were long, they were complex, and they kind of felt a lot more jarring and hammered home with the harsh A sounds. Whereas the second one, also 3 sentences actually, so similar thing, but it kind of flowed a lot more naturally and it felt a lot more natural, maybe because of the differences in the O sounds compared to the harsh A's. But it did feel kind of more whimsical and fun and less judgy and less harsh, Or maybe it didn't. Let me know what you think. But in terms of both the narrative and the word choice and the overall form, and the overall tone, A is focused on the rules and enforcing them, whereas O is focused on the fun and what expression of language can do for us. Very different approaches that comes across in everything in the writing, really. The other thing to note throughout this whole book, which I find really interesting, is how restricting the vowels determines which voice the piece is written in. So A and U are written entirely in third person, referring to the main characters only by their name. So Ubu struts, Ubu snuffs up drugs, Ubu hugs Ruth, thus Ruth purrs. Whereas for the A chapter, Hassan can watch the Can girls cha-cha as brass bands blat jazz razzmatazz. Hassan can ask that a barman at a bar tap a cask and draw a man a draft, half a dram, a glass. O is similar, but rather focusing on one character. It's kind of more general, and I find it talks about groups of people, but still in this third person. So, folks from Kokomo do lots of shrooms. Dogs growl, hogs snort. Most rooks or crows roost on rooftops. I, of course, is different because it allows for a first-person narrative like none of the other chapters do or can. So our narrator tells us a lot about what he's doing, thinking, feeling, and it allows for, as we mentioned before, a more reflective approach in the piece than the other chapters have. I climb cliffs, flinching with skittish instincts. I might slip. I might twist this infirm wrist, crippling it, wincing as I bind it in its splint, cringing while I gird it in its sling. Still, I risk climbing, sticking with it, striving till I find this rift in which I might fit, hiding in it till winds diminish. So again, very different tone, a lot more reflective, a lot more personal, and I just find that quite interesting. E is a very interesting one though, that's different from all the others, because in this one we do get our main character Helen referred to by name, but we also get the use of some pronouns, which I don't think are really in any of the other chapters. There might be a his in the I chapter, something like that, but other than that, this is like mostly where all the pronouns are. And it does make the text flow more naturally. He, she, they, and so on. It means that it's a lot less repetitive than some of the chapters, especially the U chapter, which is just Ubu does this, Ubu does this, Ubu does this. In this one, it's a lot more similar to natural speech. So whenever Helen sleeps, her fevered rest meekens her, hence she re-emerges enfeebled. Her strength expended, her reserves depleted. The extended fevers when severe entrench her enfeeblement. She clenches her teeth, then exerts herself. Nevertheless, she feels strengthless, her meek self rendered even meeker. So again, I'm not going to comment on this too much because I kind of want to hear your thoughts, but it's worth considering how this also alters tone, what it tells us, how it affects the piece overall, how it changes the tone. And this video is getting a little bit longer than I expected it to be, so this is kind of where I want to end this today. It's kind of all I want to say because I don't want to spoil this too much. I really think this is the kind of book where if you're interested in language and or poetry and or writing in general, this is something that I think you will enjoy and get a lot out of. You really should read it and experience it for yourself and just kind of have a think about it. Go away, reflect on it, read it, reread it, read it out loud, talk about friends with it. It's that kind of book. And if you do go ahead and do that, or if you've read it before, I would absolutely love to hear your thoughts. Maybe you interpreted things differently to me. Even now, just hearing things back, I'm already thinking up other things that I didn't mention in this video or other interpretations and stuff. And in that case, like, maybe you did too, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. So absolutely leave them down as a comment below. That would be awesome. Thank you. And yeah, with that in mind, that is me done for today. Thank you so much for watching and listening and all this good stuff. If you haven't seen it yet, the Fresh Poets Society stuff is back up online and running, so you can head over there now at the link on screen right now, or it's down in the description below. Basically, you can just go and submit your own original poetry. There's a prompt every month, and we all talk about it and discuss it and help each other out and give each other really constructive feedback. And it's just meant to kind of like encourage writing and growth as writers. Words. Yeah, it's meant to like encourage growth as writers, and just like we help each other out and stuff, and it's quite good. While you're over there on my website, you can also check out my photography print store if you want to get any cool original artwork from me as prints. It's all cool and good and stuff, and at the minute there's a 10% discount because the store's new and shiny and exciting, and I just wanted to give you guys a discount, so you can literally just use code NEW10 for 10% off your first order. And yeah, if you do get any prints, let me know what you think of them, show me them in your home, all that kind of good stuff. I love seeing it, and it gives me the warm fuzzies inside. But I'm rambling now. Okay, that's enough self-promotion. Thank you for watching today. I appreciate you guys a hell of a lot. I'm clapping too much. I don't know why I started doing this. Thank you for watching. I appreciate you, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.